Thank you. Morning, everybody. I've got some slides to show you, so you'll be listening and looking, I'm afraid, from me. My role, just to kind of give you a bit of introduction, and my bio said a little bit, I'm not an environmentalist. I have to come out like some kind of alcoholic at the start to explain that. And part of the reason I think I got the job within the organisation here to help us become green and sustainable was because I wasn't. Because if you imagine we're an organisation, I'll explain about the agency in a few minutes, we're full of environmentalists, as you can imagine. There's quite a lot of the devils all over the place. And you almost want somebody to come at it from a business point of view to be able to do business change. So my background is just running large departments of people doing stuff. So I approach it much from a practical, non-green fundamentalist point of view, if you like. And that was a conscious decision by the company to put somebody like me in charge of this kind of work rather than somebody that really knows all of the green detail. Okay, there you go. The agency itself, I'm going to talk a little bit, just very briefly, about what it is, for those that don't know, and then I'll go into a little bit more information about what we've done and how we've done it. You can read this as quickly as I can say it, but we're about 14 years old, and we're quite large, and we're fundamentally an environmental regulator. So we go out and we harass businesses about making sure they're compliant with environmental laws, which is fine. But kind of with our title comes along an expectation that we'll also help them with sustainability issues as well. And the approach we've wanted to take with it is, we never want to be criticised for people saying, well, only the Environment Agency would do that. We rather like the idea of, you're a large company that has similar problems to us and you've been able to do some sensible things that have saved you cash and made you greener. So that's the kind of approach we want to take. So we don't do things just because we're the Environment Agency. And you can see, size-wise, we're pretty big. The strong scientific slant, curiously, it hinders us a little bit. If you imagine there's many organisations, I'm sure like yours, where you have those doomsayers that argue the toss on everything that you say and every initiative that you do to try and reduce the environmental impact of your company. We have, frankly, hundreds of them. They seem to email me all the time with ideas as to why what we're doing is wrong or not perfect. But it strikes me that the important thing in some of this work is make a decision and go for it. You're never going to be 100% right. You're never going to get all the embedded carbon into every decision you ever make. The trick is to make some decisions and do something. Our impacts are quite wide. We're quite a large company, as I say. So we've got the normal ones that you can see there. So we've got a couple of 300 buildings or so that use energy and water and waste and all that kind of stuff. A bit lower down, we do a lot of construction. So if you imagine, we are responsible for flood protection in England and Wales. So we build a lot of stuff. We've got a lot of contractors building and maintaining a lot of kit. So we run the risk of causing pollution incidents, big ones, ourselves as well. And we do. And we have to make sure that we learn from those and we minimise them. And carrying on down, we obviously buy a lot of stuff. Our turnover's around about 1.3 billion, so we're quite large. So we make sure that our procurement processes generally have a good green overlay within them. We don't buy things that are entirely green, of course, because that would make no business sense sometimes. They're too expensive. The one that's missing from here, curiously, is our pension fund. And there's one that a lot of organisations haven't really thought of. Our pension fund is worth about 1.6 billion. So, it potentially has a much larger impact on the environment than our own activities in some respects. So we have a green overlay. But again, not stupidly green. If we just invested in enormously green companies, the pension fund wouldn't work. So we have to have a sensible approach to that as well. Basically, we have a lot of impacts. And my role is to lead our organisation on making sure that every single one of these is doing the right things in the right direction. I'm no expert in how to buy sustainable goods, but I poke the people that are, and I'm the thorn in the side that makes them think about it in a sensible way. Everyone generally wants to know about the carbon footprint. You probably can't read it all, so I'll describe the headlines, but it's always nice to see other people's, isn't it? The purpley one down at the bottom there is buildings. So a good chunk, 22%, does that say, of our energy use and our carbon footprint is from our buildings. So that's the stuff that you're probably all familiar with, how you address that. We've heard about it already. You change the lights, you do all that kind of clever stuff and get people to turn things off and you shut buildings down. That's great. Over the far side, you've got the fleet. Badged vehicles, leased cars. At the top, you've got mobile plants. That's diggers and trucks and tractors, because we're doing all that construction work, don't forget. So there's a lot of fuel being used. So all of these things are what we can address. The hard one for us is this big, horrible, light purpley lilac one, which says pumping electricity. For us, if it's going to flood, if it rains a lot, to protect you guys from flooding, we have to pump loads of water. Massive pumps all over the country. And if it's really dry, we have to pump loads as well to get water into places that are dry. So we're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. We pump all the time, whether it's wet, dry or indifferent. And well, what do we do with that? If we're going to reduce that part of our carbon footprint, and ironically come anywhere in the CRC league table, of course, which we're a part of as well and a participant in, we've got to really address this one. And that's a hard one. Do we flood you more? Or do we not give you water when it's dry? So what do we do? And of course, we've got things that we need to do around changing pumps, altering how we think about managing them, and changing the energy sources for them. But it's a real tricky one for us. It's fundamentally why we exist. And to get a company to change why it fundamentally exists in this agenda has been hard. One way to do it, we're going to talk about behavioural change throughout today, I'm sure. Just showing this chart was kind of my tactic here. So what I did, I injected this chart into everywhere you can imagine. Every paper I did, it was attached to the bottom of emails. I got other senior managers in the organisation to pop it into meetings all over the damn place. And what it did over the course of about 12 months was just remind everybody about that big lilac blob, and it got their attention. Eventually they realised what it was all about, and we now have a whole suite of work going on to start to address that. And it's a bit of a competition between our regions to see who can maximise the savings from this source of energy. So behavioural change, sometimes you just badger people. It's the only technical way I can think to describe it. How are we doing so far? I guess part of the reason I'm here, I suppose, we're doing quite well, and we're doing all right. You can see the numbers there. I guess the big one for us, we're a company that has to travel a lot. If we're regulating businesses, we've got to travel to meet them quite a lot. That top one there, we've reduced 14 million miles a year. I mean, that's quite a good chunk. We've saved a lot of money from not having the cars that we didn't need anymore, paying people for the mileage, of course, when they're claiming miles, the fuel that's used. So it saves us a good chunk of money, as well as we haven't stopped our business from operating. People have planned their routes better. They haven't driven if they haven't had to. They've taken public transport. We have a very clear travel hierarchy. It's just a page of guide which says your first consideration is don't go to the meeting. Do it by phone. Don't have it. So that's a real nice success for us. And you can see the others more quickly than I can read them, of course. But we've done reasonably well on these things. It starts to get harder from here on in, of course. But we've got some pretty ambitious targets to carry on. So far, so good. One of the things that we've learned is about patience as well. This particular chart shows buildings energy, so how the energy's changed over the last 4 or 5 years on the energy that's used in our buildings, so offices and staff, rather than pumping. And you can see for the first 2-3 years, well, frankly, not much happened. You know, there was an awful lot of work to get people to do stuff, but it took time. And I think one of my messages for today is there's a lot of ambition to do things very quickly in this arena. And I think businesses, especially large businesses, have to, like us, have to be realistic that sometimes it takes a while to get the big drops. We finally got it. We started to make a good drop, and the stuff that we've done is going to stay. You know, it's not going to carry on. And this is having the same number of staff, the same number of buildings. We haven't really started reducing those yet. This is about being cleverer. Some kit, which I'll come on to in a bit. But we've seen a good step change now, which we can see carrying on as well. So it takes a little time as well, and brave business leaders to realise it's not going to happen in 1 year. These are some of the things that we do. I didn't want to today. I've been to enough of these conferences. I'm sure you have as well, where you come away with lists of hundreds of things that people have done, and you know most of them. You can read them elsewhere. So you know, changing the light bulbs, that's brilliant. And I see there are organisations here today that are supporting that. That's great. There's tons of other things you can do as well. I'm not going to dwell on them all. I've got a few that are perhaps a little different. Relentless communication is part of it, and of course you don't want to bore people with posters, but there is something about consistent themes. So if you've got a travel quarter, then spend 3 months where people see the same poster everywhere. It's on the toilet doors, it's on their pay slips, it's on the screens when it pops up when they turn the computers on. Curiously, we hear a lot about the bad news so far of things that are going wrong in the world. There's other ways of communicating and engaging with other groups. So like we said, you're convinced probably already, that's why you're here. I don't know how many, in 20 odd years of EastEnders, I don't know how many times they've had a storyline about the environment. If I'm not mistaken, none at all. We're all very proud when we get articles in The Guardian, but the Guardian readers are pretty much convinced, I suspect. How often is the environment and sustainability in The Sun or in Heat magazine or Nuts magazine? Pretty much none. But if we want to address the masses of this country, if you like, we're going to have to start coming up with interesting ways of describing it. And is it possible? I have an example. One way of doing it is something I do. So in my little bag here, I carry with me all the time. I go to do presentations quite a lot, and I often have this. It's a DVD. And we commissioned a professional comedian to come up with a 15-minute show all about climate change. And it engages a different type of audience from the ones that like charts and things about climate change and maps of the world that are great for us, but other people don't relate to them. So a comedian gets their attention.